Welcome to episode 30 of Success Demo. In each episode, I analyze the theoretical practical aspects of one more newly released cards. To celebrate this nice round number, we are going to do a double whammy today, featuring from Council of the Crest, Azmari EdTech, and Degree Mill. Now, if you've watched my previous video, which you really should before watching this one, Successful Demo number 29 featuring Corporate Grant, well, you've seen these cards before. They were the cards played by my opponent using TheBigBoy's Azmari Glacier deck. So yeah, we'll just quickly run through them since you already are sort of acquainted with them, starting with the latter. Degree Mill is NBN's defensive 5-3 agenda for this cycle. From Jinteki we have Obokata Protocol, from HB we have Ikawa Project, and now we get Degree Mill here. To me, I think this agenda is, how good this agenda is highly dependent on at what point the runner steals it. Okay, and this ties in with its strengths and weaknesses. Degree Mill is an incredibly powerful defensive agenda in the early to mid game. On turn 1, it basically never gets stolen because the runner starts with no installed cards unless they are, you know, Adam, Chololo. But other than that, in this case, generally, if runners don't have anything installed, they run a central, they see Degree Mill, oops, I don't have any installed cards, well, guess I can't steal that. So, what this means is that you can save, as the corp, you can safely, you know, if you have Degree Mill in your opening hand, for example, you can be fairly confident that even if you don't ice HQ, the Degree Mill will stay on for at least 1 or 2 turns because the runner needs to set up, get a couple cards down before they can steal it. Similarly, if you are the runner, you should know that running early game is it's not going to yield very much because if your opponent's running 3 Degree Mills, like half their agendas cannot be stolen off the bat. So yeah, it does discourage turn 1 running. At least you need to install 2 cards before thinking of doing so. And for a lot of runners, installing 2 cards is not usually something you're willing to do that early. Typically in the early game you want to play burst economy events and draw cards, so yeah, by the time you get your 2 installed cards settled, the corp is already on turn 2 or 3 and has more than enough time to find the ice they need to show up the central. So this really basically what I'm trying to say is that this really helps the corp get by the first couple of turns if they don't draw enough ice, which is really nice for NBN. In the early to mid game, if this is the first agenda stolen by the runner, it is potentially debilitating. Let's read the text. You need to shuffle 2 installed cards into the stack as the runner in order to steal Degree Mill. This two installed cards is obviously 2 lost clicks. You spend 1 click to install each card, well, now they're uninstalled. That's 2 clicks sapped away, plus X credits, where X is the total install cost of the cards you chose. So, outright, just like that, it's already strictly better than an Ikawa project, right? Ikawa forces 1 click and 2 credits, this at least 2 clicks. So, that is really good. Not to mention that it is further worse, it is much worse if your deck is heavy on events. Event heavy deck typically doesn't run many installables, maybe a couple of economy and draw resources and their breakers, and that's about it. So if you are forced to shuffle in breakers as a result of stealing Degree Mill, it opens a huge scoring window for the corp. If you steal one agenda, they score another. That's not a very good trade as the runner. And to make things worse, if you are forced to shuffle in key economy cards, you know, think of something like a fully loaded liberated accounts or something like a tech trader if you are guys. That is not something you want to do, as it will impact your future board state growth as well. So Degree Mill is pretty powerful in that sense. Now, unfortunately, it's accompanied by a very glaring weakness. In the late game, if this is the winning agenda that the runner steals, Degree Mill is essentially blank, because by the time you reach that stage of the game, the runner surely has at least 2 cards installed. Even if it's the only 2 breakers they have, it is of no consequence if they shuffle their breakers into their stack at the end of the game, because they already have won the game. And this is the big problem with Degree Mill. At least with, say, Ikawa Project, you are forced to pay the extra click, meaning that you can't click through things like Fair Shout 3 or Run Last Click. against HB. For Obokata, it's obvious you can't run with fewer than 4 cards in hand, but with Degree Mill, no such thing. The restriction isn't really a restriction at all, because by default, you probably need some installed cards if you're going to steal this agenda late game. So this is, its early game prowess is counterbalanced by its late game blankness. Not to mention that this is also a very matchup dependent agenda, in the sense that if you are playing against a runner playing net installer, I'm thinking something like Haley that just spits out a bunch of cards on the board, Degree Mill is a lot less useful. There's typically a bunch of spare cards lying around, a Sacrificial Construct here, Tapworm there, for example. These cards can easily be returned to the deck because they were installed clicklessly with Haley's ability. Haley will have no trouble stealing this agenda at all. Another thing you have to take note is that if the runner is running limited use cards that run out of power tokens or perhaps virus tokens or credits on them, things like Daily Cast and David, well, the runner might actually be gaining ground by shuffling these cards back into the deck so that they can be reinstalled at a later time, completely refreshed. This is another big problem with Degree Mill that neuters its early effectiveness. All in all, I think this is the weakest of the defensive 5-3s we've seen so far, but hey, at least NBN's getting something. Now let's quickly move on to Azmari EdTech. This is NBN's first proper economy ID. No, NBN making news does not count. And this means that it has virtually no competition in the economy department. If your deck's too poor, just run this ID. As such, this will be an ID that will be commonly seen, especially given its raw potential power. 2 credits per turn. That is pretty amazing. Most criminal IDs are kind of matched that way. You think of Lowe's or Gabriel Santiago, those are also 2 credits per turn typically. So yeah, pretty powerful. Except that with the criminal IDs, there's a lot of competition in faction, whereas in NBN, there's no competition. So in terms of the economy department. The other important thing to note is that this has a deck limit advantage. You only need a 40 card minimum, which points you immediately to the 3-point agenda suite. You can run 6 3-pointers and that settles all your agendas. This is quite important to note because that is exactly what the Big Boy's Glacier deck does, and I think it's a pretty effective agenda suite, especially considering that in faction you have those easy ways to get 1 point, be it Echo Chamber, for example. Also, things like 15 minutes. That's another easy way to get 1 extra point. Finally, it must be said that unlike Corporate Grunt, which we covered last time, I think Azmari EdTech is good design, which is, well, thanks to the developers, the game designers for that. Even though it's a boring vanilla effect in the sense that gaining credits is something that a lot of other cards do, however, this poses interesting gameplay decisions from both sides. As the corp, you need to name the correct subtype in order to get maximal use of your identity ability. Thus, this rewards you with knowledge of your opponent's deck and card deductions throughout the game, as well as assessing the board state. Sometimes it might be better to call out program, for example, even if your opponent isn't running that many programs. If you're trying to score an agenda and you want to, get a win-win situation for yourself. As for the runner side, this could be an even more interesting decision, gameplay decision, because giving up 2 credits per turn to the corp is a big deal. And so you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to play around Azmari EdTech's ability? For example, if they keep naming resources, is it viable for you to install all your resources at one go and then not install any the next turn so that you can minimize the number of credits you concede to the corp? That is a decision that is very similar to what goes through your mind when you play against like Polana Foods, for example, where you tend to bunch your draws in the same turn so that they don't get that many Polana triggers. And this can be potentially very rewarding, as I mentioned. You don't want to concede too many credits to the corp. Basically, Azmari EdTech really is a really nice piece of design, because even if you can't help it as the runner, maybe you are an event-based deck, something like an Oracle May event deck, or like the deck that I played last time, the Geist deck, which runs a lot of resources, you don't feel like you're suffocated due to this ability. Even though this ID particularly punishes runners who major in one specific card type, I should say, like resources or event, for example. As the runner, you don't feel like you're being suffocated because you're not losing credits. It's the corp that's gaining credits. So you're making your opponent faster, but you're not hindering your own growth as well. So, you know, at least there's no negative player experience in that regard. As mentioned, we are going to be playing the Big Boy's Azmari EdTech deck. This was a deck that my opponent played last time, biz the dat, and now this will be the second game of our 2-game series. We'll be swapping sides this time. I'm the one on Azmari EdTech this time, and my opponent will be playing Guys. But it's not my Guys, it's their own version of Guys. Wait till you see the differences in our decks. So for those of you not familiar with this deck, I'll just quickly run through. This aims to score 3-3-1. You score 2 3-pointers and the final point from the Echo Chamber. The game plan is basically to wear the runner out by forcing them through the remote repeatedly using lots of false baits. I wouldn't say they're even ambushes in that regard. They are win-win cards for the court, because if the runner chooses not to run and trash these cards, you get lots of benefits. Ash protects future agendas, MC Austerity helps you score your 3-pointers, Echo Chamber gives you that 1-pointer, and NGO Front still gives you money. So every time you jam something in the remote, basically, it's a win-win for you as the court, and as the runner, you can't help it. It's a lose-lose. And the best part is, you're not limited by the number of these cards you run. If you, after using these cards, just reshuffle them back in with preemptive action, and you're good to go once again. Alright, let's watch the mirror match unfold. Marlow Keep. That's 4 economy cards, 4 very, very strong economy cards, and a toll booth. Duh, that's a keep. That is an amazing opening hand that means that I won't have to worry about money for the rest of the game ever. Crazy stuff. Now, the turn 1 play is quite interesting here. I think most people might be tempted to ice up centrals, but we know that Guys has an uncontestable late game, right? They will be able to get through servers with ease, and they will be very rich once they have tech trader set up. So my turn 1 here is going to be a turn 1 like no other. I'm going to install Marilyn so I can get Marilyn money immediately, and Toll Booth on the remote to prepare scoring immediately. Now, as we mentioned in the game intro, Degree Mill is basically impossible to steal on turn 1, which is why I'm happy to leave my centrals wide open. No account siphon threat. The only thing I'm really afraid of is deep data mining, but again, if my opponent is deep data mining with nothing installed, they can't steal Degree Mills. I'm more than happy about that. Now, the other amazing thing about running IPO in Azmari EdTech is that if your opponent concedes the first Azmari EdTech trigger to you, you don't need to spend your second turn click IPO, click for credit IPO. As you saw here, I could instead install IPO because I gained the 2 credits that you would normally click for from my ID ability. So this ID is a perfect ID to play IPO out of and makes it that much more smoother. You see, I'm able to set up a very strong board state with Toll Booth and R&D to negate any early spy camera action. As a hard end run, my opponent won't be able to steal an agenda if one happens to pop off right now. And I'm able to also start threatening the remote with a double advance NGO front. Now, I knew my opponent could very easily get into this remote. They just had to run HQ, install Maxwell James, and then run the remote. Unfortunately, it seems my opponent has not drawn the Maxwell James because they are not contesting my remote. I was quite sad about that because I wanted to force out the Maxwell James with the Toll Booth rest, given I'm so filthy rich, and ruse them into wasting a Maxwell James on an NGO front. That did not happen, so instead I'm going to continue building up for the real agenda. One single Toll Booth is not enough to deter a runner with Maxwell James, so I need to get the Archangel down and get Crisium Grid on HQ. This is very vital in defending against Maxwell James. My opponent draws with Spy Camera, peeking at my deck, installing a bunch of programs, even overwriting one of the installed programs because they don't have enough link. That's to get the technical writer money. My Marilyn expires and I now have 24 credits to my name. I draw into IP block and SSL Endorsement. My first agenda finally appears. It's time to get it scored. My opponent setting up their board state incredibly quickly. By now, I would have loved to score a 3-pointer. I am roughly 2 turns behind on that, I think. So that's a big problem, because this turn I'm not even threatening the install double advance. What I needed to do was to put the IP block on HQ, because I'm really afraid of the Maxwell James. It could come any moment, and I cannot keep the runner out if all I have is a toll booth on the remote to end the run. So now my opponent installs a bunch, runs the remote, and I realize I can't keep them out because they installed just enough icebreakers to get past my Archangel and toll booth. Double crowbar does the trick, and I concede the first agenda to my opponent. This is horrible. Again, I'm 2 turns behind Geist. I should have drawn, I wish I drew the agenda earlier, but well, the game goes on. Let's try to soldier through these tough times. With the SSL money, I'm able to secure an MC austerity policy. Hopefully I draw into some ice that I can use my big bucks on. Meanwhile, my opponent runs HQ here, and I'm gonna res the Crisium Grid because I'm afraid of a rogue emergency shutdown. Now, the very fact that my opponent purposely trashed my res Crisium Grid is a sign that I need to have the Crisium Grid up at all times. So I'm gonna install yet another Crisium Grid on HQ. Make sure my opponent doesn't get through to this one. And once again, you see my opponent act as though that Crisium Grid is their kryptonite. They immediately whack HQ again through the IP block. I have to rest the Crisium Grid again because it seems like it's really important. They might be running some sort of shutdown, I don't know. I'm not gonna let them have it. I pay 3 to rest the Crisium, you pay 5 to trash it. I'm coming out ahead, but they pop their tech writer, putting them at a healthy 16 credits. I've run out of Crisium Grids, it's time to reshuffle them with preemptive, except that I've drawn into my SSL. Alrighty, this should be interesting. So you notice the last time I was frantically drawing through my deck because I needed to see the 3-pointer badly. Without the 3-pointer in my hand, I can't score it next turn with my ready MC austerity policy. Unfortunately, my opponent thwarts the MC austerity policy. Even though they had no way of getting through my expensive toll booth, they did manage to find the Pollock. My 2 Crisium Grids weren't enough. The IP block on my HQ was not enough. They managed a successful run HQ to install the Pollock and trash my 3 counter MCA. I'm not thrilled about that. In return, given this scoring window, I'm going to install the degree mill in the remote and plan to advance it next turn. Alright, I draw the perfect card here in the Ash. Ash will greatly help in defending the degree mill, so I'm very tempted to install Ash and double advance here. Again, we need to go fast, and fast and furious it is. My opponent needs to lose the game before they get too fast set up. And this is where I start regretting my life choices. So I had 2 options for the agenda there. I could have jammed the SSL endorsement, or I could have jammed the degree mill. In this situation, I decided to go with the degree mill, and that was a bad choice because degree mill doesn't reward me anything at all when I score it. It's a blank 5-3. My opponent contests the Ash remote, but that's too little too late. It's their last click, so if they can't beat the Ash trace, that's it. With my bounty of credits thanks to Azmari EdTech getting triggers basically every turn, in spite of the corporate grant that's been running, I'm able to outtrace my opponent. They weren't able to recover after all the Crisium Grid trashes, all the Pollops, the use of the Pollop. That gave me a scoring window so that the Ash was able to protect this not very good agenda. A blank 5-3. So yeah, if that had been an SSL endorsement, it would have given me 9 extra credits, a big deal. So another skill testing of component of this deck, picking the right agenda to put in the remote. Yeah, so now it's time to get rid of the agendas in my hand. There are too many right now. I'm going to put the SSL in the remote, guarded by an additional IP block this time. We note that our opponent is out of airbag nails. They use their airbag nail to bypass the toll booth on the Ash run, giving me a very solid scoring window here. They can't really break the toll booth or the Archangel cheaply because they spend a whole bunch of money dropping their AI breaker in Varmadiva. That is something I'm happy to see. Even though Varmadiva breaks a lot of my ice, because most of my ice is single set routine, it is also an AI breaker, which greatly increases the effectiveness of IP block. So I'm feeling very safe with the IP block on HQ. My opponent has Forger to remove it, I guess, which is pretty okay. Now, I draw into too many agendas for my liking. Too many agendas in HQ. That guys hasn't shown a legwork yet. A single legwork could be the end of my game. So with that in mind, I am actually going to ditch one of my agendas into the bin here, knowing that I have a preemptive to rescue it the next turn. It is very unlikely that guys runs my archives because they don't have any cards typically. that synergize well with archive runs, not running cards like, you know, Tapworm or Mining Accident. So, my opponent decides to contest this Never Advance card, interestingly. Well, I can't blame them. It's my game-winning agenda. I'm on 6 points and Echo Chamber wins me the game here. Therefore, they have to run it and trash it. Good on them. Right. So, passing turn over to me, we realize that Corporate Grant and Azmari EdTech have been grinding at each other turn after turn after turn. Just as with game number 1, where I played Guys against my opponent's Azmari, same thing here. I never felt like I really bothered with either the Azmari triggers or the Corporate Grant triggers. They just cancel each other out nicely, so I was, you know, playing as though both were not in play at all. Yeah, and that's due to the design of the deck. This EdTech deck is incredibly rich, and Corporate Grant is incredibly effective against someone with no currents who only scores 3-point agendas. Now, much to my horror here, my opponent ran HQ and sniped the 1 in 5 degree mill. This was neither the first nor the last agenda. However, because I'm up against Guys, a runner who likes to install a bunch of cards, my opponent easily took and absorbed the hit of the two items being reshuffled back into the stack. Not that the stack was very big, all they had to do was pop the Sports Hopper and they would get those cards back again. So I would say this degree mill was rather ineffective in defending itself. It did not slow my opponent down one bit. Because of the HQ run, they were able to get down their political operative, which proves to be yet another hurdle I have to cross. That is a really annoying piece of tech against my Echo Chamber, because I'm not able to use the triple click ability on Echo Chamber to win the game before my opponent has a window to trash it with political operative. So what are my outs? Well, I would need 2 Echo Chambers, which are both in the bin. This is gonna be really difficult. I think I did reshuffle them with preemptive action earlier, but drawing them again would be quite a pain. So as you see in the chat, I'm asking myself, contemplating, what on earth is my out? Even though I'm so close to victory, 6 agenda points, I can taste it in the air, but you know, I'm still so far, right? That last point is super hard to score when your deck isn't really made to score 1-point agendas. There are no fast advance options, so my opponent isn't really pressured to run at all. Not until I jam something new in the remote at least. And that's what I find with the MC Austerity in my hand. My opponent runs R&D here, and well, it's time to rest Toll Booth at long last. My opponent breaks through it, doesn't see an agenda. Instead, they're gonna trash the Maryland campaign and go for double dipping. They miss, because at this point, the agenda density in R&D is incredibly low. Remember, this is a 6 agenda deck. 4 agendas are in the score area. It's 6-6 right now. There are only 2 remaining agendas in R&D. My opponent won't have too much luck dipping into R&D for that. Now, my opponent is given a window here to pop political operative before I start clicking up their MC Austerity policy. And to my surprise, to be honest, they decide to contest the MC Austerity directly with their political operative, meaning that my Echo Chambers are live once again. So knowing that, it's time to play the Never Advance game with Echo Chambers and all my assets and upgrades once more. But I don't want to lose on R&D, so I need to defend R&D. I put an ice here. This was a mistake. I should have installed the Enigma instead of the IP block. I completely forgot about Varmadiva being only able to break single subroutine ice. Enigma having 2 subroutines cannot be broken by Varmadiva. My opponent has no decoder out yet, so Enigma would be a hard end to run on R&D. I completely forgot about that. That was my mistake. To make things worse, I forget about that on my remote as well. As I contemplate which ice to put on my remote, I went stupidly for the Toll Booth instead of the Enigmas that would keep my opponent out. That Toll Booth is going to be very expensive to res. I'm starting to run dry on economy, as my opponent is still bloody rich with the tech writers, 3 of them out. They are able to afford hitting my centrals and still have enough economy to threaten the remote. Again, we are at a point in the game where both of us are rich, but my opponent is way richer than me, and well, they're Geist. They can only get richer from here. 14 credits in the pool, 13 on the tech trader. That's ridiculous. Sorry, tech writer. They hit my hand but come up short because the winning agenda is in the remote, which they eventually run. And here, if I had the Enigma, well, it wouldn't have made a difference. They would have de-rest it anyway with the Maxwell James. My real mistake was jamming the degree mill when I did. Because when I played this game, I forgot about the low agenda density of the deck. I did not realize that there were very few agendas in circulation. I could have held it in my hand instead and wait for more Never Advanced fodder to come up. As you're about to see my R&D shortly, you will notice that there's 6 jamming fodder in a row. Maryland campaigns and Geofronts and the all-important Echo Chambers. I really should have stuck to my guns by playing Never Advanced games with the assets. Instead, I got too hasty, dropped the agenda in the remote, which was easily contested by my opponent. I should have also realized that with political operative off the table, my opponent was compelled to run every single remote from that point on. So it was a very obvious move for them to run the degree mill. I should never ever have put that agenda there in the first place. Now, as with game number 1, where I played guys against Biz the Dead's Azmari EdTech, I compiled a list of statistics. This game lasted 20 turns, and the amount of economy swing generated by both Azmari EdTech and Corporate Grunt were very much in proportion with what we observed from the mirror match. Azmari EdTech triggered 75% of the time on 15 of my 20 turns, netting me a total of 30 credits. And it wasn't that difficult against guys. All I needed to do was to name resource, except for the brief window where my opponent ran out of cards in the stack, in which point obviously you name event to catch the Levy AR access. But of course this was a favorable Azmari EdTech condition because guys is very resource heavy. Against a typical runner, I would expect the payout to be 1 to 1.5 credits per turn, and I would expect the trigger rate to be roughly 50% of the time, slightly higher than that maybe. So an ID that gives you a credit every turn, baseline, not too shabby I would say. And same thing with Corporate Grunt. It over the course of 20 turns, it sapped 18 credits from me. Again, I didn't really care because Azmari EdTech meant that I was floating in cash. But this shows you the efficacy of Corporate Grunt against, a corp that's not prepared for it. Interestingly, up to this point, you notice that this video's title mentioned 3 cards, but we've only been talking about 2 so far, the EdTech and the Degree Mill. What about SSL Endorsement? Well, we've saved it for last. It may not be the best though. SSL Endorsement in this particular game netted me 18 credits, completely negating the Corporate Grunt, which was actually pretty important since it sapped so much money from me. It enabled me with my EdTech credits to build a 4 eyes deep remote and res all 3 toll booths towards the end, so that was pretty good. SSL Endorsement actually fits in this particular Big Boy Glacier deck perfectly. I want to refer you back to game number 1 where I was playing guys against Biz the Dad's Big Boy EdTech. He did score an SSL Endorsement towards the mid to late game, and just to jog your memory, this is what the board state looked like. After scoring it, they put themselves on exactly 0 credits, and this illustrates the problem with a deck that wants to score SSL Endorsement aggressively, because this doesn't show up the big problem of scoring such a big agenda. You leave yourself with a scoring window for the runner that you can't really defend against. SSL doesn't help you defend against that because SSL doesn't pay out immediately. On this subsequent turn, I was given the option to absolutely rampage on my opponent's HQ with the legwork that you see in my hand. If you watch the game, you will know that that did not happen thanks to my opponent's ID ability. They very smartly named event with Azmari EdTech, thus threatening the 3rd IP block on HQ, meaning that I wouldn't be able to legwork safely. If I legwork, I would have to take a tag since I Omaqua installed, and not being able to clear the tag would mean very bad news for me. So one thing a lesson learned here is that SSL fits perfectly in this particular deck because it serves as a form of diversifying. It diversifies EdTech's economy package. It supports the ID ability very well. On my opponent's next turn, when they started the subsequent turn, they got 3 credits off the SSL, 2 credits off the Maryland, for a total of 5 credits. So after scoring the SSL, they were able to bounce right back to hedge fund level, without needing to click for a single credit because of the passive gain from SSL Endorsement. So that is very powerful, and that is the reason why I think SSL Endorsement works best in a slow deck such as this Glacier deck, because you don't really want to score it aggressively early on and expose a scoring opportunity for the runner, yet the passive economy gain is so powerful that you just want to run this agenda. Hence, SSL Endorsement, even though it reads almost similarly to Corporate Sales Team to the point where you might think it's basically a 5-3 version of it, it still has a markedly different dynamic. Because of the delayed payout, it works best in slow decks, and again, just like Degree Mill, if this is stolen or scored as the last agenda, it is absolutely worthless. So it has the same drawback because of that. It's not that good late game. Right, so now that we've covered all three cards, what is the summary of the day? Well, I think Guise and Corporate Grant are a pretty powerful hand in hand, and in this particular mirror match, both times the Guise deck came out ahead of the Corp. I definitely think this is a matchup where Guise is favored simply because, firstly, because the EdTech deck is not prepared for Corporate Grant, and secondly, because Guise just deals with Glacier very well anyway. As for Azmari EdTech, well, it's a very generic but very strong and reliable identity. I think this will be the default ambient identity moving forward if you're going to build a non-tech based deck. You'll need a very, very strong reason to give up this passive 1 to 1.5 credit gain every single turn, especially given the current state of ambient economy. Well, hope you enjoyed this video and hope you enjoyed the 30th episode of Successful Demo. Special thanks to Biz the Dad for making this happen and for the wonderful mirror matches. I've learned a lot from it and I hope you have too. Thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll see you next time.